As always, welcome for attending this webinar, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So the priority points module was added in the 4.5 release. So for those of you who are not currently on 4.5, which is most of you, this is something you get a chance to look forward to. And this is Bob Wolf. I will be presenting for you today. So the points and ranking or priority points module is a really cool way to calculate attributes for somebody by giving them a point value and then looking at those point values and determining a specific rank for a person. So how do they stack up against other people who are being evaluated the same way? So one of the great advantages to using priority points is being able to look at many different data points that may be scattered throughout the database, throughout the application. So for example, if we wanted to try to figure out a prospect's affinity or how do they interact with our institution, it's really up to you to kind of figure out what kind of information do we want to look at. We might want to look somewhat at which events or how many events they've attended, determine whether or not they are part of any membership programs that we have. Are they attending? Are they a member of a specific board of directors, or whatever? So coming up with these attributes or these things that might drive or let us know what somebody's affinity is beyond those that we oftentimes think about, like how much money do they give or how often do they give. This would allow us to have a very simple number and ranking system based on maybe things that are a bit more disparate throughout the system. We might want somebody to have a higher affinity score for attending a certain event or having a specific position on a board. If you are the president of a board, maybe you should get more points. Maybe that is an indicator of higher affinity than if you are holding another position within that particular board. So we really want to look at and have you guys determine what are those trigger points that can drive us to a stronger affinity with the institution. We might also want to look at propensity to give. So what are those attributes about a constituent or a prospect that would potentially drive them to give more, or how can we determine what somebody's capacity is? And that can be looking at solid numbers that we have, like something from Wealth Engine or Donor Search. But it could be based on other attributes that we've collected, and this allows us to bring them together into a single data point for us to use in reporting and or delivering on screen. So what I want to do with the rest of this session is to talk about how those attributes, how those points and rankings are going to actually be built in the system. So you can kind of get a feel for what do you need to understand about your data in order to start building points and rankings in your version of one. So the very top level, which is called the system, is that highest grouping. So if we're creating a score for giving, or a different score for affinity, or a different score for athletic priority points, each of those would be considered a system. And we're going to eventually get a roll-up score that tells us what's happening with that system. Underneath the system, we have our categories. So for example, our system of giving rating might be made up of individual scores at that identify their historic giving or their largest single gift, which would all have different points. All of those totals would roll up then into a single giving rating score. Inside of those categories, then, we're going to use a selection wizard query, and that's kind of where the magic is going to happen. We're going to have the definition of criteria within our selection wizard queries. So an example of how this kind of all rolls up into this single category or single system, excuse me. So if we wanted to have a propensity score, and that's going to be our system is propensity. So within that propensity score, we want to create categories for total giving, largest gift, number of gifts, recency of giving, and depending upon how you do in each of those categories, you might get different point values. So, for example, historical giving. This is a person the screenshot that we're seeing right now. They have gotten 40 points based on their historic giving. We're going to look and see how they might have come up with that point total. Their largest single gift, they got 10 points for that. And within each of those, we're going to be using that query. So you maybe get 10 points for having a single gift of $10,000 or greater, or maybe you get 2 points for a gift of $100 or more. So you can get all of these individual levels all built out with their individual rating scores. So made up of the system and the category, we might have a different point setup, a different system for affinity scoring, for example. And this we might be looking at their relationships, their memberships in the system, how old somebody is, how have they been doing volunteer service, a specific membership program that might be out there, is their spouse an alumnus, and all of those individual categories within this system then can give us a point score. And as we add those up together, we end up with a score for, or points for, the system. In this case, we have an affinity rating for this constituent of a 30. And the real genesis of this project of having priority points really came from some work we were doing with some athletics organizations. And they had a very complicated way or need for calculating their seating for athletics scoring, for athletic seating. And it was made up of, in this case, it was made up of how many years have you been a season ticket holder? How many years have you been giving charitable giving? You got so many points for every $100 of charitable giving since 1985, and you got another set of values for anything before 1985. So it was very complex and difficult to handle in a single query. So as we were putting this project together, we decided that this will work really well for things other than just coming up with maybe a complex setting for priority points for athletics. Although it still does work well for athletic seating. So again, we have our system, in this case, Wildcat Club, and this is our list of the categories that we've set up with the descriptions of what each of those different categories is being used to calculate. Once you have established or built your priority points, we want to be able to look at them in a couple different ways. One, you can look at each category or system and you can see a person's score. So that's going to be all the points that they have accumulated within that individual system. And we can view those points and or rank in relation to other constituents within the priority points module. We can also see them in Constituent Profile. And there's also a way to bring them into the header, which we see at the bottom of the screen. So that's kind of the overview of what priority points are. I do want to walk you into how they're actually set up. So we're going to be looking at the menu options, how you create the systems and the categories and tie the selection wizard queries to them, what the selection wizard queries are looking for. We'll also look at some basic differences between the ranking, so rank versus dense rank, and then where we can see the totals. So in your menu, you're going to see a new menu option, of course, controlled by security, called Priority Points. And within the priority points, you will see a section for constituent points, which will show you how somebody's a constituent's priority points based on their constituent. Or you can look at the rankings, and that's going to show you across all constituents how do people rank. Within admin points, this is where we do the setup, again, controlled with security to allow certain people in to actually create the priority points. And we would start with creating the point system setup and moving then into the criteria. So this is point system setup. This is the browse page, and it lets us see all of the systems that are set up. This example shows 3 different systems: athletic priority points, giving rating, and affinity rating. To create a new system, we would use the Add button at the bottom of the page and give our new system a name and a description up to 4,000 characters. So this is kind of showing us what the setup we used for creating the giving rating system. Point name, giving rating, point description is giving rating system. A selection wizard query can be assigned to an entire system, and this allows us to create a subset of constituents within the database that we want the calculation to work on. So, for example, if we wanted points calculated just for alumni or just for members of our membership system, we could limit on the very top level of the system who is going to be included in the calculation with this selection wizard query. If no selection wizard query is established at this time, then everybody that's in the master table will be calculated against the rules for the system. There is an active flag here. We're going to see this active flag at each of the levels. It lets us inactivate a system or a category for the calculations. The general rule on this is wait until you have all of your definitions set up before you turn it on to be calculated, and that's where the active flag comes in. So you just wait until you're done and then activate the point, in this case, the system. You have the option, like when you create gift clubs, to include in this case, a system in the header. So that's talking about the constituent header. There's some settings in control info that let you build things into H system or into the different groups that are available for a one user or a one user group. You can also choose to allow this system to be displayed in the constituent profile. So there's a new section in constituent profile called priority points. If this flag is set, then this category or this system would be displayed in the constituent profile. And lastly is the column here called format ID, and this lets you determine how you want the points that are accumulated in this system, how you want those to be displayed. So there's a format list here for us to choose from. Do you want that to just be a number? Do you want it to be a percent or a decimal? You can see the different setups here. Depending upon how specific this calculation needs to be, you can see you can include up to 5 decimal points in your calculation. When you're establishing the system, there are some other delimiters that you can set up on the system itself by including up to these 8 user variables and 4 date variables that, in our example, are turned off because we're not using them. So once you've set up your system, which is what we just kind of walked through, once you've set up the system, now you want to go in and create the categories, or what are the different things that we're going to be looking at in order to build our point total for the system. So that's found in point system criteria. The first time you come into this and choose a system, which is at the very top, point system, it says giving rating 3. This, of course, would be empty. This is going to show you all of the categories that are built for a system. Once you have these established, this is a browse page, so it will show you all of the categories established for a system. So when we want to add new categories or criteria for the system, we click on the Add button and choose our point system and create a new category name. There's lots of different ways to describe this category as we go through, and it gives us then the ability to see different levels of specificity when you are seeing it in the browse or when you're reporting out on this, creating some type of charts or reporting. So basically we have our category name, which is the top level, so a pretty the top level, the basic description of what this category is. Then you have your point description, which is a more detailed way of identifying what's happening with this point description. How are the points what are the points being used for? In this example, these are ratings based on a total giving level. Our point character, which is a small description, and this is useful for calculating or identifying the range of the point values that can be in here. So in this case, our point character is between 5 points and 40 points that are available in this category. And then the category description, this is giving you a rather large area to put together the detail of what is the query going to be looking for. So in this case, the query is looking at total giving, and it's going to provide points from 5 to 40, and this is how the breakdown works. So by giving us an area of 4,000 characters to kind of write out this definition, this saves the user from having to open up the selection wizard query to see the definition or to see what the query is actually doing. So this is a layman's way of going in and seeing what is the query actually doing. How is it coming up with this total? Because there are, in most cases, going to be multiple categories per system, you can change how the order in which they display. Instead of forcing the order to be based on description, alphabetical description, we do have this display order in here. It's also useful if you are using the data itself to produce a description of what's happening with the points calculations. We see this lots of times with athletic organizations doing seeding. They might just want to pull this data out and display it online to say, this is how your priority seeding is being calculated. This would allow you to define that order. You also have the option of identifying whether or not this particular category, so in this case historical giving, can be overridden. And there are several options for override. You can simply say there are no overrides to this particular category. We're going to only allow this to be calculated information. You can allow it to be adjusted, which means if I had a point calculation that came through, let's say it was calculated at 40, I can adjust that by saying +5 or -5, but it still allows the calculation plus or minus whatever adjustment I wanted to give that point total. Or I can say replacement. So if it calculated at 40, I could put in 50, and at that point, it's just going to replace that 40 with a 50 every time. It'll never look at the calculation. So you can kind of define this setup to be no adjustments, replacements, or allow both replacements or adjustments at the time of doing the adjustment value. So that's all defined at the category level. Then the magic. So the magic here is for the calculation is done within the selection wizard query. Important to make sure that you are keeping both your category description and your selection wizard query synced together. So just going and changing your category description doesn't do anything as the queries are running and the points are being calculated. You would need to both update the description so people know what's happening and make the changes directly in the selection wizard query, which is how the points are actually being calculated. And if we take just a quick look, I know not everybody here is going to be someone who is familiar with writing selection wizard queries, but we did some very specific things to try to make this as simple as possible for those of you who are administering the points calculation. So within Selection Wizard, we have a new output category, similar to we have specific output categories for our report widgets or for ID filters. We have a specific output category called Point System Calculations, and every Selection Wizard query that's used for points calculations must use this output category called Point System Calculations, and that was added in product in 4.5. Then when you're actually working with the Selection Wizard query, there's a couple things that are very important. So you can, if you're familiar with SQL, I'm using a case statement, and since we're just looking at total donations, I'm looking at the club total from a gift club, and I'm saying look at the club total for this constituent, and if their giving is greater than or equal to $100,000, then they get 40 points. When their club total is greater than or equal to 25,000, then they get 30, so on and so forth, until if they've given us anything greater than a penny to $5, or excuse me, anything greater than a penny up to $500, then they get 5 points. Else they get 0. What's important about this whole query is that your point, or the points that somebody's going to get, are always going to be delivered to the system using the alias, in this case, as points. So that's very specific. Your query has to deliver a column called as points. The other thing that's very specific to the Selection Wizard query is it must have and ID equals, and we're used to seeing in our queries runtime prompts delivered with the $signs, and that's really what this is creating a parameter for the system, for one, to deliver a constituent ID into the query to calculate each constituent that's supposed to be calculated for points calculation for this system into that ID as a promptable text as the system cycles through each of the IDs that are supposed to be ran. So, and ID equals ID and $signs in quotes within the where clause. Otherwise, you have flexibility to do to build this query however you want to come up with the different point totals for this category. There is a calculation status field that's tied to the category, and that is going to either be never, which means it's never been ran, calculating, it's currently being calculated, or it is finished. Last on the category, we have the active flag. Again, you probably want to make sure that you have your selection with a query established with this category before you want it to start working or start calculating. So come back and set this active flag after you have your rules, your criteria defined. There are user variable fields available in the category setup, and there's 8 category variable fields plus 4 category date fields that can be enabled, and they're not turned on for our example. So once you have your categories built for your systems, it's time and activated, you want to schedule these. And the scheduling is fairly simple. You do that from the point system setup page, browse page. And instead of adding or modifying anything, you can simply choose to schedule one of those systems. And then we have a very simple scheduler, a place to set what time it kicks off, what day it kicks off, or what days it kicks off, start date and end date. So this is a schedule where we're going to run the calculation one time a week at 1:30 a.m. on Saturday. And it's going forever, really. So as soon as we enable this, it will start running once a week to populate the, or to recalculate the points within the system. And then you will start to see, as these are running, whether or not it's calculating, finished, or it's never been ran, including the last time that it was updated. So you do have the option, the ability to recalculate a system. This will take a while to run, which is why normally we would recommend that you schedule the systems to recalculate or to run in the evening when people are not working on the system, for many reasons. One, it does take a while for this to run against the database, especially if it's a master calculation. But also it's possible that as people are working in one, that there could be records that are locked and the queries won't be able to calculate. So scheduling those to run at a time when it won't be, it won't bog down the system at all. Or if you are going to, you could also write a small ID filter. So again, remember, you can set the system up to only run against a subset of IDs. You may want to, the first time you start to turn this on, do a small subset and calculate that subset data instead of running against the entire data set. You may also want to communicate back with Agilon when you start to set these up the first time. And we have set up many of these, both for testing and a few for clients to turn them on. And we might have some helpful ideas based on what your plans are for enabling these points. One of the things that we enabled when we were creating our category was the ability for that category to be overridden. And so what that really means is we're looking at a constituent's record. So this is Dave's record within constituent points. And this is showing me how Dave has been calculated. So what's his summarized points for both affinity rating and giving ratings, the two systems that we have built for Dave. Well, if for some reason we need to append or amend the points that Dave has in one of these areas, there's always exceptions. It seems like the more important the donor is, the more exceptions we might have. But this allows us to override a point that's built within within a category, override those points so that it will show up differently for Dave, even though the query might be telling us it's a different number. So being able to override. You cannot override the the system itself, so the calculated points for the system, you need to get down to the category level in order to do that. And to get to the category level, you need to include details. So constituent points, you have the option then to include details. That lets us go then into the system and see the details. Once you're able to see those categories, that's when you can come in and make those adjustments if we've allowed it. So if we wanted to give Dave more or less points for historical giving, we may want to set that up. So we can add a checkbox in front of historical giving and then choose to modify. And choose our override type. The types, again, that are going to be available to us are based on when we did our category setup to whether or not we will even allow an override at this particular category. For this one, we did allow overrides and we allowed the replace option. When you choose to override somebody's record, we are forcing you to tell us why. So I'll let you override the points. In this case, it's going to replace the calculated points. 40, this maybe wasn't a great override, other than it's not going to matter going forward, no matter what gets recalculated for Dave, his override points for historical giving is always going to be 40 because that's his overridden points. And then we added in the override reason, which is historical giving exists prior to what we have in the system. Based on the notes for that override reason, my gut feels that we probably should have chosen an override type of instead of replace with append or the other option, so that we're still going to allow the calculated points of 40, but we wanted to give Dave 40 more points for the historical giving that existed prior to the system. But that's your option as you're building this. That's really the reason why we have both of those options available to you. A very important message. In fact, I got distracted this morning when I was going through this and went ahead and recalculated without really meaning to. So let's talk about what this is doing. Once you've added an override to somebody's record, to somebody's category for their points, there's a couple things that need to happen. So for sure, I can go ahead and adjust Dave's points and say this category point total is now actually this. But more importantly, what happens is when you do that and recalculate the points, in order for the rankings to be set properly, it has to go through and re-rank everybody in that category based on the new points that you just gave Dave. And that can take some time. So you have two options here. If you want those points and rankings to be calculated right now, then you would say, okay. If you want to recalculate those points later based on whenever the schedule is supposed to happen, then on this page you would say cancel, and that will recalculate, reset those values on the normal schedule. So this points, this category is scheduled to run every Saturday at 1:30 in the morning. It would wait to do the recalculation until its normal schedule time. So in this example, we did override Dave's historical giving and set it to 40. And hopefully you can see this on the screen. If you override a category for someone, that row is going to change colors for you, and it's going to change to this red color because it's an override status. We're also going to see that when we look at the rankings page, and we can see which of our constituents are in override status, so not changing, or at least they're being edited, is going beyond the selection wizard query, because again, it will change to red color. You can also see that in Constituent Profile, but I'm going to show you that view in just a little bit, how it looks when it's being overridden. When you set up these categories and we're giving somebody points, the other thing that happens is each of those constituents that has accumulated points is also being ranked. And we're going to see two different types of rank built into the system. One is called rank, and one is called dense rank. And I'm going to do my best to explain these. They're really analytical definitions tied to these, and you can write rank and dense rank queries using SQL. But in a nutshell, the difference between rank and dense rank, if you think about what happens at the Olympics, if two people tie, somebody might get a gold medal, but then if the next two people tied, they don't hand out a bronze medal. They give them both silver medals, and even though three people are on the podium, that third that bronze level is just not awarded. So you have a person with a 1 rank and you have two people with a 2 rank, and that's what we're seeing here. So in this case, we have Dave and Tabitha. They both were calculated with 120 points, so they both tied for the first rank. But you notice that the next person down, which is Charles Best, and Mr. Cadman and myself, we all tied with a score of 110. Because Sally and Dave tied for the first rank, it had taken up that the second position, and all we had left are third positions left. So with rank, it leaves gaps when there's tied, when there are ties rather. So in this case, we only have a first position, a third position, and a sixth position, and that takes up the first 12 people that are in our list. Versus when we look at a dense rank, it does not leave any gaps when there's ties. So we still had multiple people that were at position 1, but we now have our ties that are being made both at position 2 and at position 3. It really starts to affect your querying of this data. If you were to say, give me everyone who's in position 1, give me everyone who's at least a position 2 or above, right? If you did everyone who's at position 2 or above, you would, if you're looking at rank, you would only get Dave and Tabitha, because there is no position 2. Versus if you're doing that, give me the ranks of 1 and 2 that are, if you're looking at dense rank, then you're going to actually get the first 5 people that are in that list. So both are delivered. You can decide whether or not you want to report on rank or dense rank. What's going to make the most sense for the reporting that you're planning on doing. If you have set up your system to be available in the constituent profile, you're going to see it within the priority points section in the constituent profile. And these are the two of the systems that we deliver with 4.5, called Affinity Rating and Giving Rating. And so what you see is the roll-up for Dave Brimmeyer. So what's his total affinity score, points and rank, dense rank. And then if you click on the plus sign next to the, on the far right-hand side, that's going to expand that system so that you can see the detail categories within that particular system. So it's delivered collapsed. You can expand that then to see how he scored in each of the different categories. How many points in each of the categories, rather, and how he ranks in each of those categories. The other thing that you will see is if you have overridden Dave, for example, in historic giving, which we did and set it to 40 points, you will see that as an override type of a replace, and you can see what the override points are as compared to what was calculated in that points category. once you decide whether or not you want to use rank or dense rank, if you want them both, that's fine. You can still see those. You can turn off the rank based on security if you just think it's going to be a confusing piece of data. You can also show the scores and the ranks for those systems in the header. And again, this is controlled by whether or not you have enabled the ability for that system to show up in the header. And then there's a whole bunch of different ways to show the data. This is one of them where you show the name of the system, what's their score, and then rank, and where is their placement of rank out of so many people. So let's just look at some of the different variations. So you can do points only, points with rank, points with dense rank, so on and so forth. So these are all of your options. I'm just going to show you what it looks like, what each of those options might look like if used. So you can kind of pick what you want. So the first bolded item, so in this case, athletic priority point system with a colon, you'll see that that's returned on every single one of them, which is nice because it tells you what which system you're looking at. Then after that, it will start to vary. Am I going to show them points plus rank, points plus dense rank, rank and dense rank? So it goes through each of these different variations of how you might want to show someone's inclusion in a system for priority points within the constituent header. As part of this project, we did add 4 new tables to the Summit schema: point system, point CTGRY, constituent point rollup, in which a constituent only exists one time, so that's that rollup total per system, and then the constituent category points, which they'll have one row per category per ID. And almost done, we added 4 new export baseline reports that lets you look at priority points in a couple different views. Summary just gives you, will give you the numbers of constituents in each of those, in each of the categories in the system, or categories, or if you're looking at the total, or you can do the detail, and that will show you the people that are in each of those different areas, what their points are. Each of those reports does come with several runtime prompts that let you identify which system you want to run for, which value we're going to be counting. So what's the number we're going to use? Are we looking at points? Are we looking at rank? You can choose to look at only a specific category within that point system. You can also look at only individuals or high-low values, only people in certain categories, or only people in certain degree years, to return that information. At this point, again, they are export only. The detail ones might be great ones to set up some output templates against, some export templates against, to have some pivot tables with drill down. In fact, that might be something that I work on to put into product. So hopefully I didn't speak too fast, but this is one of the new modules that I'm really excited about. I believe that it fills the gap of some analytics. It fills the gap of some ways to take the data that we have spread out in the system and bringing it into a manageable number for our users to use. Whether or not that's providing a new number for development officers to help them find better prospects to prospect on when they're trying to fill up their portfolios, or to give us better identification of people who we should be targeting for who maybe are people who would be better donors for annual fund. Does anyone have any questions that I might be able to answer now?
Hi, Bob. This is Larissa.
Hey.
I have a question about the systems. Can you use one system as piece of as a criteria for another system?
Yes. So because the totals, as long as you're only looking at for something that is a use the points from one system to drive another, that would be fine. That the tables that we build out there are can be queried as well, and you would have a point value for a specific category within a specific system by ID. So unless Dave comes up and tells me no, because it's a table, it should be fine. Dave, would you agree with that?
Yes, that's correct. In fact, one of our athletics clients is doing just that.
Great.
Great question,
And
Larissa.
I have a second question. We have built a wealth indicator score. Eric did it in a user group before he left.
Yes.
We have to essentially build that from scratch again in the point module.
Not necessarily. There may be things that you can save from there or use the data that's been collected there. It really is going to depend on whether or not there's continued manual work to maintain the user group, the attribute, where it would make sense to rebuild it out of points. But you can probably use the data again because your user group is a data element that you could use that within a point, within a priority point setup.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. What other questions do we have? If you're interested in specific, for example, Larissa, if you would like us to, instead of in general answering that question about the user group that you have set up, please feel free to contact support. And if you're interested in seeing pricing on the module or what the implementation might look like, again, get a hold of either support or call sales directly, which can be me. I'd be happy to set up some time to talk about what that implementation would look like.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions? Great. You guys are going to be getting a survey in the next 10 minutes, I believe. So if you would, please take the time to answer the 5 questions that are there. It's really easy to do, but it does help us to understand if we're pointing these webinars in the right direction. So thanks a lot. I'm going to end the call now. This will be a recording in case there are other people that didn't attend that you want to have watch this. We'd be happy to make the recording available.